Success doesn't come from noise. It doesn't require you to announce it, to brag, or to put it on display, because what truly creates achievement is not loud declarations, but quiet, steady, persistent actions taken in the dark. Just like a seed cannot sprout amid applause, success needs a quiet environment to grow, a space untouched by outside attention, expectations, or judgment. And here's what you need to understand. The world won't help you focus. It'll pull you toward chaos. People will ask what you're doing, why you're doing it, how far along you are. But that's a trap, because the more you talk, the easier it is to fool yourself into thinking you're doing well, that you're making progress, when in reality, you haven't done anything meaningful. Your mind doesn't clearly distinguish between a promise and an action. When you tell someone, I'm about to start a business, your brain reacts as if you've already begun. You feel acknowledged, supported. But that premature recognition makes you loosen your grip. You feel as if you've accomplished something when in fact you haven't taken a single step. And then the motivation begins to fade. Silence is not weakness, it's not avoidance, it's strategy, it's a weapon. It's the ideal environment where ideas are born, tested, adjusted without fear of ridicule or interference. When you keep silent, you keep the right to fail privately. You're allowed to try, fail, recalibrate without anyone's judgment. You don't need to explain, you just need to keep going. That's how real success begins, in silence, in a process no one sees, no one knows about, but you do. You see each step you're taking, you see yourself changing day by day. And then one day, when you've truly built something worth speaking about, you no longer need to say a word. Your results will speak for themselves. At that moment, your silence is no longer a void. It's a declaration that you don't need attention to begin. You just need an irreversible decision, a solid system, and a commitment you don't share with anyone, except yourself. Anyone who's truly successful understands this. They don't post every time they have an idea. They don't live stream the building process. They don't need early applause. They need space. And they create that space by talking less to do more. If you still think sharing helps you build motivation, then you're drawing inspiration the wrong way, because true inspiration doesn't come from recognition. It comes from the small actions you repeat every single day when no one's watching. That is the only thing that makes a difference. And that is why, if you're truly serious about your goals, the first thing you need to do isn't to tell the world, but to learn the power of being silent. In that silence, you don't grow weaker, you grow stronger. Every time you open your mouth to speak your goal, you're giving away a portion of the energy that should have been reserved for action. It sounds harmless, sharing goals, seeking a bit of encouragement, a bit of empathy, but the reality is different. You're not just sharing, you're depleting. Because the energy to act is not infinite. It is generated in silence, and it drains the moment you start needing others to validate that you're on the right track. There's a paradox few people recognize. The more you talk about what you're going to do, the less likely you are to actually do it. Because you're trading internal drive for external reaction, you're exchanging the true urge to act for a nod, a compliment, a fleeting moment of approval. And in that process, you start deceiving yourself. You say, I'm getting ready to open a shop, and the other person smiles. You feel good. Your brain releases dopamine as if you've accomplished something great. But what's the truth? You've done nothing. Just the feeling of doing. And that early satisfaction steals your need to act. When satisfaction arrives before action, you lose the drive to execute. Your momentum fades, then vanishes. This explains why some people talk about a plan for months, even years, but never truly start. Not because they lack ability, but because their initial energy has been drained. Through every conversation, every sharing with someone who didn't need to hear it, every explanation that should have remained unspoken, instead of building action, they build illusions, and then they begin to believe those illusions too, that they're making progress, doing something important, when in fact, not a single step has been taken forward. The energy to act must be preserved like a flame. You can't take it out into the wind, into noise, into eyes that aren't ready to support you, because every word you speak is a cut to that flame. And if you speak too much, it extinguishes without you noticing. So don't easily say you're beginning. Don't share the plan if you haven't truly committed. Let your ideas be forged in silence, compressed into resolve, refined through action, not words. Because every time you hold back words, you retain energy. Every time you choose doing over telling, you increase your chances of finishing. And every time you move forward in silence, you send a message to yourself that you are a person of action, not empty talk. The most successful people aren't the ones who speak well. They're the ones who know when to stay silent. They understand that action carries more weight than any promise. And they don't waste precious energy on meaningless conversations, polite nods, or feedback that adds no value. They know if anything is worth saying, it must be the result. If anything needs proving, it must be through completed actions. The rest, all the promises, plans, intentions, is just breath. And breath cannot build success. Only action can. And action requires energy. Don't waste it by speaking too soon. Dreams don't die because of failure. They die quietly from small details you never expected. And one of the subtlest killers is sharing them at the wrong time. Not everyone is sensitive enough to understand what you're nurturing. Not everyone has the patience to wait for you to complete the journey. And certainly not everyone is willing to protect your dream when it's still fragile, like a sprout barely rooted. When you share a plan while it's still forming, you're placing it in a turbulent zone. You're exposing it to hollow compliments, unconscious advice, skeptical eyes, and sometimes silent envy from those who never dared to dream as you do. These reactions, whether intentional or not, begin to creep into your mind like tiny dust particles clouding your vision. At first, you still see the path clearly, but gradually you begin to doubt. You ask yourself if you're heading the right way, if the dream is realistic, if the doubters might be right, and so you hesitate, not for any clear reason, but simply because you let others interfere too early. A mistimed piece of advice, a careless joke, a skeptical eyebrow, all of these can plant seeds of doubt within you. And once doubt takes root, your dream is no longer a dream. It becomes a burden, something you start avoiding instead of pursuing. I've seen people with ideas that could change their lives, but they leak their energy through unnecessary sharing. They tell friends, coworkers, even people who don't truly understand them. They seek external support instead of inner commitment. And when they're rejected, doubted, mocked, they retreat, they hide the plan, but not to protect it because they've lost faith, because they've let others' words become the barrier to their own actions. Sharing is not always wrong, but sharing at the wrong time is entirely wrong. You shouldn't speak until you have something strong enough to protect. You shouldn't speak if you're still easily swayed by others' opinions. A dream, like a living being, needs to be warmed and nurtured before facing the wind. When you speak too soon, you're doing the opposite, throwing open the doors and letting the wind snuff out the flame before it has a chance to rise. And then you tell yourself, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe this idea isn't strong enough, maybe I should stop. But the truth is, it's not that you lacked ability, it's that you lack the patience to hold your dream privately until it was truly strong. You don't need other people's approval to begin. You just need an irreversible choice and silence long enough to build the foundation before presenting the blueprint. Don't forget, a great building does start by inviting everyone to view the draft. It starts by driving quiet stakes deep into the ground. And your dream is the same. If you want it to live, don't be in a rush to tell the world. Let it grow in silence until it's strong enough to face everything. Staying silent doesn't mean you have to live in secrecy. You don't need to become a recluse. You don't have to hide every idea as if the world is constantly waiting to steal it. The truth is, you don't need to keep secrets. You just need to know how to protect your dream. And that begins with a clear distinction. Who deserves to know, who should be kept out, and when is the right time to speak. A dream is not something to be publicly discussed when it's still in its raw form. It's a structure being built in your mind, a sketch that's not yet finished, something that needs nurturing before it can face the harshness of reality. If you bring it into the light too soon, it's vulnerable to being distorted by others' opinions, shaped by external expectations, and even dismissed by your own self, just because someone who doesn't understand reacted without kindness. The protection you need isn't absolute silence, it's thoughtful filtering. You need to know who truly deserves to know. Those who not only listen, but can also hold a clean space where you can develop your idea freely without imposed thinking. They're the ones who don't need proof to believe in you, who don't need results to offer support, and who don't need you to succeed immediately to understand that you're on the right journey. They are rare, but they exist. And you must know how to find them. Not scatter your plans to everyone you meet just because you crave temporary validation. Just like a good gardener doesn't expose young plants to scorching midday sun or early storms, You too must create a greenhouse for your dream, a quiet space where you can experiment, fail, learn, and adjust without interruption from unnecessary reactions. All real growth begins in silence, no cameras, no viewers, no audience. Because in the earliest stages, your dream doesn't need to be seen. It needs to be understood, believed in, acted upon, and that can only come from within you. Protection isn't about avoiding people, it's about mastering yourself. Mastering the urge to speak, mastering the fear of what others might think, mastering the desire to prove yourself too soon. And if you truly achieve that, you'll realize when the time is right, you won't need to introduce your dream. The results you create will do it for you. They don't need to shout. They just need to exist clearly, firmly, undeniably. At that moment, you won't have to explain your process. You'll only need to say, I worked when no one was watching. And that sentence, though simple, carries more weight than any grand speech because it comes from proper protection, not flashy, not secretive, but wise. Your dream doesn't need to be hidden. It just needs to be treated as something precious. And anything truly valuable deserves to be protected before it's shared. Not because you don't trust others, but because you believe this: some things only become powerful when they're mature enough to stand tall against the world's reactions. Your dream is one of them. That very moment when you show the world what you've quietly built is when every indifferent gaze turns into admiration. Not because you shouted something grand, but because you did what most only talk about. Surprise is powerful because it breaks expectation. It creates a reversal effect. When people weren't prepared to acknowledge you, your success becomes a wake-up call. It forces them to re-examine what they underestimated, and that's what makes your result memorable. But to achieve that effect, you have to learn to keep your journey private, not secret, just unspoken. No need to build an image before there's real value. You don't have to announce your plans every time you start. You don't have to share every step just to be praised. Those who truly make change understand this. People only remember what you finish, not what you once intended. Results are always the loudest voice, and results only speak when you've worked long enough in silence. The beauty of surprise doesn't lie in concealment. It lies in not wasting energy on attention. You channel all your mental resources into building what you truly want to create. And when it's complete, its presence is strong enough to need no introduction. You've probably seen someone launch a product, a piece of art, a project that no one heard about before, and you're surprised, how did they do that? Since when? Why did I know? The answer is always the same. They worked when no one was watching. They chose to move forward without needing validation. They were consistent every day, never breaking rhythm, never letting ego get in the way. And because of that, when they revealed their work, no one could doubt it. No one could dismiss it, because what they presented was no longer a promise. It was living proof that they had acted, persisted, and accomplished what others only talked about. That's why I always tell you, let your results make the noise. Make them look back. No need to announce, no need to warn. Action done right will create its own aftershock. And people will come to you not because you told them, but because you quietly did the work. Surprise, when paired with quality, is the sharpest blow to someone's perception. And if you want the world to respect you, don't create noise. Create impact, not through words, but through the only thing that can't be denied: results. The ones who talk the most are usually the ones who do the least. The quietest ones often accomplish the most, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're too busy doing real work to waste time on unnecessary promises. It's not about being reserved. It's about being selective. They know what truly matters: effectiveness, not instant validation. The more you talk about what you're going to do, the less time you have to actually do it. Every conversation you open about your plans is another moment you delay real action. A person truly immersed in building has no need to sketch out the structure with words. They let it rise day by day, layer by layer, brick by brick, until the result itself becomes undeniable proof. Successful people don't walk around drawing dream maps for others to admire. They go to work, they wake up early and work while others are still talking about motivation, still waiting for inspiration. They don't flaunt, not because they're humble, but because they know achievement needs no decoration. It speaks for itself. I've met people full of ideas, plans, ambitions. They talk about them every day with anyone willing to listen. They go into detail, describe scenarios, speak of long-term visions, but over time, when I look back, nothing has turned into concrete action. They're still there, telling the same story, only with a slightly different tone to make it sound new. On the other hand, I've met people who barely say a word, no updates, no announcements, no promises. They disappear from conversations. But when they return, they bring a product, a result, a tangible outcome. No fluff, just results. No motivational banners, just evidence. The difference isn't in who dreams bigger, but in who acts more consistently. And that's what people often miss. Those who talk a lot feel like they're making progress, but they're stuck in the realm of imagination. The ones who act speak little because they don't need to describe where they're going. They're already walking toward it. And each step they take, though silent, brings them closer to a real outcome. Those who constantly need to tell others what they're doing are usually the ones who haven't done much, because real action doesn't need an explanation. When you're truly doing the work, you don't have time to describe the process, because the process consumes you entirely. And when you're busy doing, you don't need applause. You just need to finish. That's the difference between a dreamer and a builder. One uses words to paint the future, the other uses action to construct it. One seeks validation before starting, the other seeks quality before speaking. Which one do you want to be? The answer isn't hard. Just look back. In the past week, how many times have you talked about your dream, and how many parts have you acted on? That gap is the measurement of the distance between where you are and where you want to be. And if you want to close that gap, you must do the simple thing few are willing to do. Talk less, do more. No presentations, no slogans. Let your results speak for you. Because in the end, the world won't remember what you said. It only remembers what you actually finished. The more you talk, the less control you have over your own story. It may sound illogical, but it's a rule few people are clear-headed enough to recognize. When you tell others about your plans, your dreams, the path you're pursuing, you're unconsciously handing over part of your mental control. From that moment on, the story is no longer fully yours. It begins to bend under opinions, doubts, unsolicited advice, and even envy disguised as concern. People will ask, "Are you sure? Do you think that's realistic? I knew someone who tried that and failed." Each seemingly harmless comment is like a small arrow dulling the sharpness of your original vision. Gradually, you start adjusting your idea, not based on inner logic, but on outside feedback. And when you do that, you lose the most valuable thing in the early phase of creation, clarity and consistency in thought. The more broadly you share, the more you're forced to explain. The more you explain, the more you have to tailor your narrative to the audience. You no longer have the freedom to think differently, to act flexibly, to adapt strategy without being questioned. Your story no longer pushes you forward. It becomes the cage you built around yourself. You begin playing the lead role in a script you've shared with too many people, and now you're afraid to change it. The real danger is when you feel obliged to fulfill the expectations of others instead of staying true to the natural growth of your journey. That's when you become bound by the very things you once said. You can't go back, can't pivot, can't learn something new, all because you're afraid someone will ask, why the change? Why not follow through? And you begin to live for surface level consistency instead of strategic flexibility. That's the price you pay for speaking too soon, too much, too widely. Every word you once spoke becomes an anchor in someone else's memory, and you'll feel pressure to stick to that script, even when it no longer fits. Flexibility is the lifeline of any success journey. It gets strangled by the pressure to stay consistent with an outdated narrative. In contrast, when you stay silent, you maintain full control of your story. You're allowed to try and fail without anyone needing to understand. You have the right to pivot without explaining. You're free to adjust, shift, and evolve in your own way, not imprisoned by expectations, opinions, or memories that aren't yours. Silence doesn't just protect your energy, it protects your autonomy. When you don't tell, don't explain, don't illustrate too early, you retain all the power of thought. You're not forced to defend past versions of yourself. You only need to move forward at your own pace by your own design. And that is the ultimate freedom the talkers never have. So if you're truly serious about a journey, start by keeping the story to yourself, not because you fear judgment, but because you want to write it uninterrupted, unbent by anyone who hasn't truly lived that dream with you. Staying silent doesn't make you weak. On the contrary, it gives you a power that loud people will never have, the right to fail quietly without being scrutinized, ridiculed, or judged before anything has even taken shape. In silence, you are free to experiment, make mistakes, adjust, and try again without needing anyone's permission. No one looks at you with suspicion. No one waits for you to fall just to say, I told you so. There is no pressure to act like a success before you actually succeed. You're free to try what no one has tried, think what no one has thought, and fail boldly without being labeled a failure. Quiet failure is the foundation of every lasting success. Because when you fail unseen, you're not wounded by outside opinions. You don't waste time fixing your image. You don't need to protect your pride or justify a misstep. You simply reflect, learn the lesson, and move forward. No one knows, so no one interferes. No one judges, so you stay focused. On this journey, being good doesn't mean getting it right the first time. Being good means daring to try, daring to fail, and daring to try again over and over until it works. But to have that level of patience, you need a quiet space, untouched by the noise of public scrutiny. Silence is how you create that space. On the other hand, if you tell the whole world that you're starting something, you've just placed yourself under an invisible magnifying glass. Every move you make will be watched. Every stumble, every delay, every change in your plan, there'll be someone commenting, someone questioning, even someone mocking. And at that point, instead of focusing on fixing mistakes, you start focusing on protecting your image. Instead of learning from failure, you spend your time putting out rumors. The pressure to look good makes you shrink. You're no longer brave enough to try things you're unsure of. You fear mistakes. You fear being laughed at. And that fear suffocates your creativity, kills your courage, and turns you into a limited version of who you could have been. Meanwhile, the silent ones keep moving. They still fail, still fix, but they're not disturbed. They fail, but no one knows. They change, but need no approval. They remake the plan, and no one laughs at them for not doing it as promised. And in the end, they're the ones who make it, not because they're more talented, but because they had the space to truly grow. The world out there is not friendly to those still learning how to get it right. Is brutal to those just starting out. So if you want to be strong, you need to create your own space, a place where you're allowed to fail without being ripped apart by feedback. Silence isn't for hiding. It's for preparation, not to conceal, but to protect. Because only when you're allowed to fail quietly do you truly have the chance to succeed solidly, not to be recognized, but to succeed so fully that no one can deny it. And that journey always begins with one simple decision: speak less and do more. In a space where there's no one but you and your commitment, is also the best advertisement. Not promises, not plans, not the number of times you tell others what you'll do. Nothing builds trust faster and deeper than a concrete, visible, undeniable result. Because words, no matter how impressive, are still speculation, still in the future. But a result is present. It's the only thing that forces others into silence, that compels recognition, that makes people see you differently, not because you said something impressive, but because you did something others are still dreaming about. A promise needs to be proven. A result needs no explanation. When you show up with a completed product, a launched project, a real step forward, no one can doubt you. They don't need an introduction. They don't need persuasion. They just need to look at the result and understand you're someone who acted, who committed, who persisted through everything that stopped them at the talking stage. In a world flooded with information and empty promises, people are numb to declarations that never materialize. They've heard too many. They're tired. And that's why when someone says nothing, just acts, just finishes, just shows up with a real outcome, that silence is louder than 100 voices. It becomes the differentiator, the value, the reason people listen. You don't need to market yourself by talking about your dreams or your plans. You just need to work long enough in silence and let the results speak. When you have results, you don't need to ask anyone to believe in you. Trust comes from the value you've already created, not from what you're about to do. And this is something very few people understand. They still believe that if they speak persuasively enough, they'll gain support. But support doesn't create results, only action does. People might applaud your exciting plan today, but if 6 months later you haven't moved forward, the applause will fade. Worse, you'll lose credibility. Meanwhile, if you steadily move forward, if you work tirelessly, if you only speak when there's something worth saying, then every time you speak, people listen, not because you're eloquent, but because you've proven it with your work. Results are the only language everyone understands. They need no translation. They don't rely on persuasion. They can't be twisted by doubt. Results are living proof that you're not a dreamer, you're a doer. When you have results, you don't have to chase opportunities. Opportunities will come to you. You don't have to say you deserve it. People will see it in what you've done. And that's the most sustainable way to build a reputation. Not through noise, but through weight. Not through introductions, but through real value. This world is not lacking people who talk well. It's lacking people who can show something real after every promise. If you're in the second group, you'll never have to compete with words. You'll compete with quality. And that quality will do your marketing better than any PR campaign ever could. So remember, don't talk about what you're about to do. Do it first. And when it's done, if you still want to talk, let the results speak for you. Stay silent until you truly have a reason to speak. Not a reason to be praised, not to prove anything, and certainly not because you're afraid people might think you haven't done anything. Only when the result you've created is strong enough to stand on its own, convincing enough that it needs no explanation, and valuable enough to silence all doubt, that's when you should speak. Until then, every word you say is a risk of draining your energy, a risk of being misunderstood, a risk of being stopped by negative feedback before you even begin. When you speak too early, you don't just reveal the plan, you expose the weakness. You give others the power to interfere with something that should have been protected. You give them the chance to plant doubt, to question, to steer you off course with a single sentence. Are you sure? Meanwhile, if you stay silent, you maintain full control. You work without surveillance, you experiment without needing approval, you fail without scrutiny. And when you return with a result that's good enough, you don't have to explain. It's enough to lay it on the table. People will look, judge for themselves, and shift their perception accordingly. No one claps during your quiet work phase, but when you show up with a clear result, they'll line up on their own. Not because you convinced them, but because you left them with no choice but to acknowledge you. You want people to listen? Then don't speak too soon. Work until, when you do speak, no one dares to dismiss it. Work until, when you finally speak, every eye is on you. If you speak when there's nothing concrete, you're playing the game of prediction. And predictions always come with expectations, and expectations quickly turn into pressure. You push yourself under the spotlight before the stage is even ready, and when you stumble, that stumble gets magnified by the very expectations your words created. Be careful. Not everything needs to be announced. Not everyone needs to know what you're doing. Privacy, when used correctly, is not concealment. It's how you protect focus, preserve energy, and build a solid foundation. Only when you're truly ready, when what you've created has passed its first test, when you know you're not turning back, only then should you step forward and let the world know, this is what I've done. No boasting required, no rallying cries, just one action. Clear, powerful, real silence is power. But only if you know when to break it. And to do that, you must learn to be silent without insecurity, steady without attention, hidden without forgetting the dream. Success doesn't need to be declared in advance. It only needs one moment and one result. When you have both, words carry weight. Until then, let action lead. Let silent effort accumulate into strength. And when the time comes, you won't need to speak to be recognized. Your presence, along with what you've achieved, will say everything. And that, always, is more persuasive than any promise ever could be.